The gunshot echoed across the Montana plains as Abigail Browning crouched behind a fallen log, clutching her stomach where new life had just begun to grow. It was 1878, and the frontier offered little mercy to a woman alone, especially one carrying a child she never asked for. Her tear-streaked face turned skyward as distant hoofbeats approached, and she prayed for either salvation or a quick end. "Madam," a deep voice called out, followed by the creak of leather as a rider dismounted. "I mean you no harm. Heard that shot from a ways off. You injured?" Abigail peered over the log to see a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. A cowboy, trail-worn but with kind eyes that somehow caught the fading light. His hand rested on his holster but made no move to draw. "I'm not hurt," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just desperate." The man approached slowly, hands visible now. "Name's Matthew Lawson. Got a camp set up about a mile from here. Food, fire, and safe company if you're willing." Abigail hesitated. 3 months ago, trusting a stranger had led to her current predicament, but winter was coming and she had nowhere else to go. She stood shakily, still holding her abdomen protectively. "I'm Abigail Browning." Matthew's eyes flickered to her protective gesture but asked no questions. "Pleasure, Miss Browning. My horse can carry us both to camp before nightfall." The ride was silent, Abigail sitting stiffly in front of Matthew, his arms around her only to hold the reins. At camp, a simple affair with a small tent and cooking fire, he busied himself preparing a stew while Abigail sat on a fallen tree trunk, watching him warily. "Been on the trail long?" he asked, not looking up from his work. "4 weeks. Coming from Chicago." She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Long way for a woman alone." "I didn't start alone." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. Matthew nodded, understanding without needing details. "Well, you're welcome to share my fire tonight. Tomorrow I can escort you to Pinecrest." Small town, but decent folk. That night, wrapped in a blanket Matthew had given her while he slept outside by the fire, Abigail allowed herself to weep silently. Her hand caressed the slight swell of her belly, feeling nothing but regret and fear. Morning brought crisp air and frost on the ground. Matthew had coffee boiling and hardtack soaking in a pan by the time Abigail emerged from the tent. "Sleep well?" he asked, offering her a tin cup of steaming coffee. "As well as can be expected." She accepted the cup gratefully, its warmth spreading through her cold fingers. "Figured we'd head out after breakfast. Should reach town by—" Matthew's words were cut short as Abigail suddenly doubled over, the coffee cup falling from her hands. "Miss Browning." He was at her side instantly, concern etched on his weathered face. "It's nothing," she gasped, straightening slowly. "Just morning sickness." Understanding dawned in Matthew's eyes, but no judgment followed. "How far along?" 3 months, give or take." Abigail's voice was flat, resigned. Matthew simply nodded, retrieving the fallen cup and refilling it. "Town has a doctor, good man. Helped deliver most of the children thereabouts." They rode into Pinecrest just past noon, the small settlement nestled in a valley with mountains rising behind it. A church steeple, general store, and saloon marked it as a proper town, if barely. Matthew guided his horse to a small boarding house at the edge of the main street. "Mrs. Peterson runs this place," he explained as they dismounted. "Fair prices, clean rooms, and she doesn't ask too many questions." The boarding house owner, a plump woman with silver-streaked hair, greeted Matthew warmly. "Mr. Lawson, been nearly 6 months since you passed through." "Been working cattle up north, Mrs. Peterson. Got a lady here in need of a room. Miss Browning's traveled far and could use some rest." Mrs. Peterson's shrewd eyes took in Abigail's condition with a glance, but her smile remained genuine. "Of course, dear. I've a nice room at the back, quiet and private." That evening, after a proper meal and bath, Abigail sat in the small parlor downstairs. Matthew entered, hat in hand, having seen to his horse at the livery. "Heading out tomorrow," he said, taking a seat across from her. "Ranch handwork waiting in Wyoming." Abigail nodded, an unexpected pang of loss hitting her. This kind stranger had been her only ally in a cruel world. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Lawson. Just doing what any decent man would." He hesitated, then added, "Mrs. Peterson mentioned the doctor will see you tomorrow morning." "Yes, though Abigail's voice faltered. "I don't know what I'll do after." Matthew studied her face for a long moment. "What was your plan coming west?" "I had a cousin in Sacramento. I was to stay with her family until—" She gestured vaguely toward her stomach. "But the man who was escorting me left when he discovered my condition." "The father?" Abigail's laugh was bitter. "No, the father was my employer's son back in Chicago. When his family discovered what had happened, they gave me money to disappear." Matthew's jaw tightened. "That's not right." "Very little is right in this world, Mr. Lawson." Abigail's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I have no family, no skills beyond housekeeping, and now a child I never asked for." The silence stretched between them, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantel. "I could stay," Matthew said finally. "For a while at least." "Help you get settled?" Abigail looked at him in surprise. "Why would you do that?" "Because everyone deserves a chance." He stood, placing his hat back on his head. "Think on it. I'll check with you in the morning." That night, alone in her room, Abigail allowed herself to hope for the first time in months. The doctor's visit the next morning confirmed her pregnancy was progressing normally. "Strong heartbeat," the elderly physician said kindly. "You're carrying a fighter, Miss Browning." Outside the doctor's office, Matthew waited, leaning against a hitching post. "Good news." "The child is healthy," she said, her voice hollow. Matthew offered his arm, which she took hesitantly. "I've spoken with Mr. Davidson at the general store. He's looking for help with bookkeeping. Said your education might be just what he needs." Abigail stopped walking. "You arranged a job for me, just an introduction. The rest is up to you." His smile was gentle. "And I've rented a small cabin on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but it's sound and private." "Mr. Lawson, I can't accept such charity." "Not charity. Investment." He guided her toward the general store. "Meet Mr. Davidson. If you like the work, we'll talk about the cabin after." 2 weeks later, Abigail stood in the doorway of the small cabin, watching Matthew repair the porch railing. She had taken the bookkeeping position, which paid enough for her modest needs. Matthew had delayed his departure, staying in the livery loft while helping her settle. "You don't have to do all this," she said, bringing him a cup of water. "Don't mind it." He accepted the water gratefully. "Place needed work anyway." "That's not what I meant." Abigail sat on the porch steps. "You've put off your job in Wyoming." "Why?" Matthew set down his hammer. "Truth is, Miss Browning, I've been drifting for years. No place particular to be, no one waiting for me." "And now you're waiting for a woman with another man's child." Her voice was soft but direct. "I'm helping a friend in need." He met her gaze steadily. "Nothing more expected." But over the next 3 months, as autumn turned to winter, something more grew between them. Matthew took odd jobs around Pinecrest, repairing buildings, helping with cattle, never straying far from the small cabin where Abigail's belly grew rounder with each passing week. They fell into a comfortable routine. Matthew would bring firewood and groceries, Abigail would cook supper, and they would talk late into the evening. She told him of her childhood in Boston, her move to Chicago to work as a governess, and the betrayal that sent her fleeing west. He shared stories of cattle drives, the years after the war, and his dreams of someday having his own ranch. Never thought much about family, he admitted one snowy December evening. Figured that wasn't in the cards for a saddle tramp like me. Abigail, now 6 months along, rubbed her swollen belly. I always wanted children, just not like this. Matthew watched her from his chair by the fire. How are you feeling about it now? Confused, she sighed. I feel this child moving inside me and I can't help but love it. Yet I'm still so angry about how it came to be. Understandable. The town talks, you know. Abigail looked up at him. About us, about you staying. Matthew shrugged. Let them talk. They think we're. She blushed. Would that be so terrible? The question hung in the air between them. Abigail stood awkwardly, using the table for support. I should rest. Good night, Mr. Lawson. Matthew, he corrected softly. After all this time, I think you can call me Matthew. Good night, Matthew. As winter deepened, so did their connection. Matthew built a cradle from pine boards, carving delicate patterns along its edges. Abigail knitted tiny garments from wool Mrs. Peterson provided. They never discussed what would happen after the birth, a question that loomed larger as February approached. One bitter night, with snow piling against the cabin walls and wind howling through the pines, Abigail woke to sharp pains. Matthew, she called out, fear evident in her voice. He was through the door in seconds, having taken to sleeping in the small lean-to attached to the cabin. What is it? The baby, it's too early. Abigail clutched her stomach, face contorted in pain. Matthew was already pulling on his boots. I'll get the doctor. No, she grabbed his arm. The pass will be blocked with snow. No one can get through tonight. Then I'll deliver it myself. His voice was calm, belying the panic in his eyes. The next hours were a blur of pain and fear. Matthew boiled water, gathered clean linens, and positioned Abigail as comfortably as possible on the bed. His hands were steady as he wiped her brow and coached her through each contraction. I can't do this, she sobbed as dawn approached. I'm not strong enough. You're the strongest person I know, Abigail Browning. Matthew held her hand firmly. And you're not alone, I'm right here. With a final, agonizing push, the child entered the world tiny, red-faced, and indignant. Matthew caught the infant in gentle hands, clearing its mouth and nose as he'd seen done with calves on the ranch. A strong cry filled the cabin. A girl, he said, voice thick with emotion. You have a daughter. Tears streamed down Abigail's face as Matthew placed the newborn on her chest. She's so small, but mighty. He covered them both with a blanket, like her mother. After cleaning up and making Abigail comfortable, Matthew collapsed in the chair beside the bed, watching mother and child sleep. The storm had passed, leaving pristine white landscape outside the frosted windows. When Abigail woke hours later, she found Matthew still there, his gaze fixed on the infant nestled against her. What will you name her? He asked softly. Abigail looked down at the tiny face. I don't know. I never let myself think that far ahead. She needs a name, something strong. Why are you still here, Matthew? The question had been building for months. He met her eyes steadily. Because I want to be. This child was never part of your plans. She's a mistake I have to live with, but you don't. No child is a mistake. His voice was firm. Different circumstances might have been better, but she's here now, perfect and whole. Abigail's tears came then, months of shame and fear pouring out. This child was a mistake, she wept, the words tearing from her throat. Matthew moved to sit beside her on the bed, one large hand gently covering the sleeping infant. Then let's call it a miracle, he said simply, because that's what she is. The weeks that followed were exhausting but filled with small joys. Matthew insisted on remaining at the cabin, helping with the baby, whom Abigail named Grace. The town doctor finally made it through once the roads cleared, pronouncing both mother and child healthy despite the early delivery. Mrs. Peterson visited often, bringing meals and advice. Mr. Davidson held Abigail's position at the store, telling her to return when she was ready. The town's initial gossip had transformed into quiet support for the unusual family. One evening in early April, with Grace sleeping soundly in her cradle, Matthew and Abigail sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. "I've been thinking," Matthew said, breaking their comfortable silence. "A dangerous pastime," Abigail teased, the easy banter between them now second nature. He smiled. "I've saved some money over the years, enough to put a down payment on land." Abigail's heart stuttered. "Was this goodbye? You're leaving then?" "No." Matthew turned to face her. "There's good land available just outside town, enough for a small herd, a decent house, room to grow." "That sounds wonderful. Your dream. It could be our dream." He took her hand carefully. "If you wanted." Abigail's breath caught. "Matthew, I know it's not conventional. I know Grace isn't mine by blood, but these past months—" He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've come to love that little girl as if she were my own, and I've come to love her mother even more." Tears filled Abigail's eyes. "The town would talk. Let them. We'll give them something worth talking about." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I'm asking if you'd consider being my wife, Abigail, if you'd let me be a father to Grace and maybe more children someday. Why would you want someone like me, with my past, my baggage?" "Because you're brave and strong and kind. Because when I look at you, I see my future." He brought her hand to his lips. "Because I love you, plain and simple." Abigail closed her eyes, allowing herself to imagine the life he offered: a home, a family, love freely given. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Their wedding took place in June, a simple ceremony in the town church. Grace, now 4 months old and thriving, wore a dress Mrs. Peterson had sewn from her wedding gown. Mr. Davidson gave the bride away, and the doctor's wife played the organ. Matthew had purchased 10 acres of land with a creek running through it, perfect for raising cattle and crops. The cabin he built was larger than Abigail's rental, with room for the family he hoped they would have. Their first years together were hard work, establishing the ranch, raising Grace, weathering the unpredictable Montana seasons. But each challenge faced together strengthened their bond. When Grace was 2, Abigail gave birth to a son they named Thomas. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 18 months later. Their family grew alongside their ranch, which Matthew named Miracle Valley. Grace never questioned her place in the family. Matthew treated her no differently than the children he fathered, teaching her to ride, to rope, to respect the land that sustained them. When she was 8, Abigail finally told her the truth of her birth. "Does that mean Papa isn't really my papa?" Grace asked, her small face serious. "He's your papa in every way that matters," Abigail assured her. "He chose you, loved you from the moment he saw you." That evening, Grace climbed into Matthew's lap as he sat on the porch after supper. "Mama told me about when I was born," she said, leaning against his chest. "Did she now?" Matthew's eyes met Abigail's over Grace's head. "She said I was your miracle." The little girl looked up at him earnestly. "Is that true?" Matthew gathered her close. "The absolute truth. You brought me to your mama, and together you gave me the life I never knew I wanted." Years passed, the ranch prospered, and the Lawson family became respected fixtures in the growing community. Abigail established a small school in town, teaching the local children alongside her own. Matthew served on the town council, helping guide Pinecrest as Montana moved toward statehood. On the eve of Grace's 18th birthday, Abigail found Matthew sitting on their porch, staring at the stars. She sat beside him, their hands finding each other automatically after nearly 2 decades of marriage. "Penny for your thoughts," she said. Just remembering that day I found you behind the log, scared, alone." He squeezed her hand. "Could never have imagined where that moment would lead. Do you ever regret it? Taking on another man's child, a woman with such a past?" Matthew turned to her, the moonlight silvering his now graying hair. "Not for a single moment. Best decision I ever made." The next day, as they celebrated Grace's birthday with a gathering of friends and family, Abigail watched her firstborn laughing with her siblings and the young ranch hand who'd been calling on her with Matthew's cautious approval. "She's happy," Matthew said, coming to stand beside his wife. "We did good." "You did good," Abigail corrected. "You saw possibility where I only saw shame." Matthew shook his head. "We did it together. That's how all the best things happen." Later that night, after the guests had gone and the younger children were asleep, Grace found her parents sitting by the fire. She knelt before them, taking one of each of their hands. "I've been thinking about my future," she began nervously. "David has asked me to marry him." Abigail's free hand flew to her mouth. Matthew's face remained carefully neutral. "And what did you tell him?" he asked. "That I needed to speak with you both first." Grace's eyes, so like Abigail's, were bright with emotion. "Before I decide my future, I wanted to thank you for my past. For making a family out of complicated beginnings." Matthew leaned forward. "Grace, from the moment you were born, nothing about loving you has been complicated." "Papa," Grace's voice wavered. "I know I'm not your blood, but you stop right there," Matthew interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "You are my daughter in every way that matters. Blood is just one way to make a family. Choice is another. And I chose you just as I chose your mother." Abigail wiped tears from her eyes. "Your papa once called you a miracle, Grace. And that's exactly what you've been, the miracle that brought us together, that showed us what family really means." Grace embraced them both. "Then I suppose I should tell David yes," she said through happy tears. "And that he'll have big boots to fill, measuring up to the man who taught me what a father should be." That night, lying beside Matthew in the bedroom of the house they'd built together, Abigail reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from a terrified young woman behind a log to the matriarch of a thriving family. "What are you thinking about?" Matthew asked, his arm around her shoulders. "About mistakes and miracles," she answered. "About how the thing I once thought would ruin my life became the foundation for everything good in it." Matthew kissed her softly. "That's the thing about life, my love. Sometimes we don't recognize our blessings when they first arrive." "I recognized you," Abigail countered. "Maybe not right away, but I knew there was something special about the cowboy who stopped to help a stranger. And I knew there was something extraordinary about the woman brave enough to keep going when the world had given her every reason to stop." He pulled her closer. "That's why I had to stay. I'm glad you did." Abigail rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady heartbeat that had become her home. "Thank you for turning my mistake into our miracle. Thank you for letting me," Matthew whispered into her hair. Outside their window, the Montana night spread vast and starlit over the ranch. They'd built together, a testament to the power of love to transform lives, to the family created not by circumstance but by choice, and to the miracle that began with a cowboy's simple act of kindness on a lonely frontier road.